It's still very volatile.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, I provide a service and I'm accepting Bitcoin. How am I supposed to?
Well, there are already solutions for that, like BitPay or Coinbase. They say, okay, if you specify price in US dollars, you can say that, and we take the responsibility of converting that to Bitcoins. The buyer pays in Bitcoins, and then we're responsible at the end of the day to give you those dollars that you specified in our apps. So they do the exchange on the spot. Then there's no volatility because your money is being exchanged at the current rate right now when the purchase is being made.
Okay, so what do I tell my customer when they ask me how much?
Well, they say $20 for Bitcoin, you punch the numbers and put it with the amount. They can look at it, check it against their exchange rate and see whether it's acceptable for them or not. And
okay.
Like with BitPay too, you can they accept payments in Bitcoin, and then the end user or the person selling the product, you can get paid in Bitcoin but actually never see Bitcoin. It just goes cash straight to your account.
Okay.
Right, without you ever holding or touching or doing anything with Bitcoin.
So I just offer this opportunity for them to pay in Bitcoin, but I always quote in real currency.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit confused on something. So let's see, the Bitcoin is related to the standard currency exchange rate, and so you're talking about paying your bills with Bitcoins. Mm-hmm. So does that mean 1 month you pay 400 Bitcoins to live, and the next month, depending on where the Bitcoin is gone, you could pay 4,000 Bitcoins?
Or you could just
Or
switch.
you could pay one?
Yeah, or you could just use cash and you can always switch back out too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Isn't that a little bit shaky?
Kind of. It's actually
your
interesting
rent
though.
in Bitcoins, not in Canadian dollars. You say my rent is 20 Bitcoins per month. That's it. You pay 20.
So the landlord is either losing huge amounts of dollars or making.
No, because you can cash out right away. It's instantaneous. So if the rent is $400, you send $400 worth of Bitcoin, right? Then he cashes out and he gets $400. But what's interesting, if you paid only $300 for your Bitcoin, you could pay your $400 rent later with the $300 worth of Bitcoin that you bought earlier, right? So there's actually a capital increase that you can enjoy capital gains and pay for the same item.
Losses.
Yeah, if you're on that side, sure. I mean, it's good to keep things realistic, of course, but the market's so volatile.
Currently the market's going up, but at the start of the year it was
Volatile to you
$50 per
means
Bitcoin.
it only goes up, right?
Volatile means it goes up and down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let me just wrap up here, and then because
Don't
I'm
forget
sure there's
No, I don't.
people that want to talk.
I don't forget it.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. I'll be around all night so you can ask me questions. I'm just gonna announce that we're gonna do Canada's first I think it's Canada's first Bitcoin hackathon. I did some Googling today. It seems like it will be. So it's I've got 10 tickets up for $25. They're super cheap. Those 10 go. We're gonna go up to 50, and then we'll keep going up to make sure we actually can pay for the food that I have to supply.
I'll take one.
Yeah. Well, that's bithack.ca. You can grab a ticket there.
Quick question about Bex. Do you guys do only Bitcoin, or are you sort of agnostic?
So, well, one of the reasons it's taken us a long time to ship the platform is because A, we need to link all the exchanges together eventually, and B, we want to be able to support all the different currencies. And so you're making all these design decisions that take time, but will future-proof it.
So you are currency agnostic?
Yeah, we can. It's essentially set up to trade any two lists of items, and that can be whatever currency, digital or fiat. Cool.
So what is the name of your company?
Bex. Yeah. Well, that's not even on there, is it?
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
It's down at the bottom right-hand corner.
bex.io.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everybody for sticking around. This is awesome. We've got one more presentation coming up. This is Johann Gever of Monetize.net, formerly of Vancouver, now operating out of Switzerland, correct?
That's right.
Yes, thank you, Johann, for joining us. Thank you.
John Page version.
Exists. 2 buttons on the mouse. There's one button. Oh, is it? I've got a laptop. There's only one button. There's no drop down menu.
Okay, so I'm going to just give a little bit more of an overview, big picture of where we are with digital finance and what it means. So for millions of years, from the beginning of time until about 10,000 years ago, humans lived together in small, decentralized network communities of about 30 to 70 people. And then about 10,000 years ago, there was a technological advance, agriculture, that allowed people to live together in big communities of many hundreds, thousands, and even millions of people. But humans have a limit, the Dunbar number. We can only know about 150 people well. So when we shifted from small communities to big communities, we couldn't track who everybody was anymore. So in small communities, you knew who everybody was and you couldn't really get away with doing bad things. Something got stolen, you would know it's Joe or Sally. But in a big community, you could now get away with doing bad things. And so there was a breakdown of social order. And when there's a breakdown of social order, people prefer coerced order to an anarchic chaos. There's many examples of this. For example, a recent example is Russia. We had the opening up of Russia in the early 1990s, and eventually people were just overwhelmed with the chaotic situation. And they voted Putin in. And they're actually quite happy. If you ask Russians, they are pretty happy with Putin because he's a strong guy, he keeps order, and things are okay, even though civil liberties aren't really ideal. So, in other words, technology is really fundamental to how society is organized. On a small scale, you can work with human trust models, but as soon as you have a lot of people living together, human trust models don't scale very well. They just break down and then you get strongmen taking over. And that is why we moved from small decentralized network communities to large centralized hierarchical communities. It's a technology reason. It's not that people are bad, it's just technology. But then about 500 years ago, there was another technology that was developed, the printing press, which allowed people to communicate their knowledge much faster and in a decentralized way. You didn't have to accept anymore what the king or the church told you. You could make up your own mind. You could read what people wrote on the other side of the world. And that was just the first of a whole series of technological advances, the most recent of which are the internet and Bitcoin. And of course, social media is part of that as well. So now with Facebook, even though our mental limit is 150 people, roughly, with the way that society is integrating, there's more and more transparency. And everything you do, even the things, that party when you were 17 years old and you smoked a joint, everything's there. And it's there for, permanently. So now it's much more difficult to get away with doing bad things. If you hurt people, it's going to be known. So these kind of technologies are enabling us to now scale living together in a big society without a centralized structure. So now we can swing back to the original social model that we lived in millions of years, decentralized, networked communities, but on a large scale. So technology allows us to scale where humans couldn't scale. So that's kind of like what we're seeing is that there's a phase change from decentralized society for millions of years, then centralized society for about 10,000 years, and then about 500 years ago, another switch started towards a new decentralized society, but at a higher level, so kind of spiraling up. And so that those thousands of years, which is long for us as an individual, but on a social scale, it's just a blip. It's just a phase change. So we are now moving, in the process of moving back to the original model of decentralized society. So let's look at what the 4 pillars are of a decentralized society. In my view, there's 4, and the first one is decentralized communications. Because before you can do anything, before you can organize a society, you need to talk, you need to communicate. And the 2 essential pieces of decentralized communications are the internet and cryptography. Because if you only have the internet, then using surveillance, the authorities can still control and censor what you do. So you need the internet plus cryptography so you can communicate privately, and that way you can keep things decentralized, and those hierarchical, centralized control methods break down, and you move back to a networked arrangement. But that's just the beginning. So once you've talked about stuff that you want to do, then you agree, okay, let's do this. So the second piece is decentralized law. So right now we have a centralized legal system where there's a few people at the top that decide what the laws are, and they tell us what the laws are, and they enforce them, even if those laws make no sense. So we need a decentralized legal system. And fortunately, there's been a lot of work done in that area, and we essentially now have a model, a complete model for organizing society in a decentralized way, legally. I've actually been part of some of those efforts. And the key components there are, first, you have choice of law, so you choose your own law. So if I do a transaction with somebody, we can actually choose which law applies to our transaction. I don't know how many of you have done a contract, but any good contract specifies which law that contract is subject to. So in BC, that would be typically BC law or Canadian law, but there's a very interesting twist. Most people are not aware that you are free to choose any law that you want. You can be in BC, and you can choose the law of New York to apply to your contract, or the law of England, or the law of Germany, or you can make up your own law. And that's legal and it's enforceable. So the first thing is you have choice of law. The second one is that you need a choice of adjudicator. So if there is a dispute, you can choose who is going to hear and resolve your dispute. Most people just go to the default and they say, well, the law courts are going to do it for us. And as we know, the legal system is incredibly inefficient, and it doesn't necessarily make a good choice. But we don't have to use the legal system, the existing law courts. We can use our own adjudicators using arbitration. So that's the second piece. The third piece is decentralized enforcement. Now, interestingly, most of the world's countries have agreed that they will enforce arbitration agreements even if they were from a different country or a different law. So this includes all the major economic countries. From China, it's over 160 countries. They signed this convention about 50 years ago. So you can choose your own law that applies to your contract. You can choose your own arbitrator, and then those decisions will be enforced by basically every country in the world. So you can have a decentralized legal system. So that's pillar number 2. So first you talk about what you want to do, decentralized communications. Then you agree what you want to do, you make a contract, decentralized legal system. Then you actually need to do it, so you need to produce something, and that's where we get to decentralized production. And the key technologies for decentralized production are decentralized materials and decentralized energy. So for materials, there's a whole bunch of technologies developing there. There's things like atmospheric water generation. There is nanotechnology. A very important one is 3D printing. With 3D printing, instead of having these huge factories, which started kind of in the days of Egypt, the big pharaoh that had all his army of thousands of slaves, these days we have big factories, whether it's for General Motors or Apple in China. Those big factories are basically hierarchical structures. And if the government doesn't like whatever is being produced, they can decide we're not going to allow that in the country. But with nanotechnology, you can download your own design from the internet and print it out at home. And how is customs going to double check that? I mean, it's just not enforceable across a population of 7 billion people. There's other technologies there as well, like nuclear transmutation, which is a bit into the future. But essentially, with these things and the way they're developing, you will be able to put together matter in any form you want. And then the other part is decentralized energy. There are very interesting breakthroughs. This is a little bit into the future as well still, but there's more and more technologies that will allow you to essentially produce as much energy as you need, decentralized right at home.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So with those two together, you will basically be able to produce whatever products you want right at home, and it's not subject to having to be transported across borders or customs or any of those things. Okay, so first you talk about something, then you agree to do something, then you actually do it, but for there to be a transaction, you want to do payment, right? So the fourth pillar is decentralized finance. And for decentralized finance, the key technologies there are, you need a decentralized currency, non-political money, and we have that in the form of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is just one element. It's a currency. Just like if you had the Canadian dollar just by itself, it's not very useful. You are basically limited to face-to-face transactions. In order for it to be really useful in a global economy, you need a whole ecosystem built around that. So what are the essential pieces of the ecosystem for decentralized finance? So the decentralized currency, but then in addition to that, you need smart contracts plus cryptography, which is kind of an analogy or a parallel to in the internet, you need the internet itself and cryptography both together. So you need smart contracts so that you can do these financial contracts, but they need to be strong, made secure through cryptography. And the evidence for this is that the Bitcoin protocol itself, which uses strong cryptography, has actually never been successfully breached. There have been some issues here and there, but essentially the whole thing is working flawlessly. But in the ecosystem around it, which does not use cryptography very well, we've had all kinds of scams. Like Robert was pointing out, over 10% of the coins have been stolen. Not because of Bitcoin itself, but the ecosystem that is weak. So we need to make that ecosystem stronger. So if you have all those four pieces in place, decentralized communications, decentralized law, decentralized production, and decentralized finance, you have all the pieces for a decentralized society. That will now, if you put those together, they are basically what I call the technology of trust. Instead of having to trust a person, like a king or a president of a country, you can trust the technology to keep order and to assure the integrity of transactions. Because humans just fail to do that on a large scale.
For so many different reasons.
Yeah. So let's look at what is our company doing to help create that. So all of us are building pieces of this, and I'm just going to give you an idea what we are doing as a contribution to that. Monetas is essentially a smart contracting platform. So what are smart contracts? Smart contracts is basically a digital contract. So just like we've had paper contracts until now, you can make digital contracts. But they have certain additional features that make them really useful. The smart contract model that we are using in our system is based on a Ricardian contract that was invented by Ian Grigg about 20 years ago. A Ricardian contract has two levels. The first level is human readable, so you can just print it out and it's in English. You can take it to a judge and he can read it and it's like a normal contract. But then it has a second level, and that is that it's computer readable, which means the computer can understand the contract and execute it. And that's really important to be part of a global networked, automated electronic society. And then you combine that with cryptography, and you have powerful contracts that are very flexible, that basically anything a human can dream up, you can put in those contracts. And combined with cryptography, you can make sure that it's not possible to cheat. Now that's a major advance. Because right now, our whole society depends on people sometimes make mistakes, sometimes they are deliberately bad and they cheat and so on. So then you need other people to check those people, but you know, those other people are like, well, maybe they're also humans, they might fail, so then you need other people to check the people who are checking, which brings us to the old Roman thing. You know, the Romans said, who watches the watchman? custodia et ipsos custodes. So there's this infinite regress. But with technology, we can get out of that regress, and the technology itself guarantees that it's not possible to cheat. So we all know that software has bugs. No matter how great the software, how good the developers are, it's going to have bugs. So how does this statement that I just made, that you cannot cheat, but it's made in software, so maybe you could do it through the software somehow, right? Well, our technology is based in a very interesting concept that's called triple signed receipts. That makes it essentially impossible to cheat, even if there are bugs in the software. Because the software requires all parties that are involved in the transaction to sign the transaction. So if I want to do a transaction like with Robert, and I want Robert to send me money, he first has to sign that he agrees to the money to be sent before that transaction happens. Which means a party can only be cheated if they explicitly agree that they're going to be cheated. If you want to screw yourself, that's fine. But if you don't, if you're careful, then you're secure. So that's the basic concept that our technology is built on. So we're a smart contracting platform. So what does that mean though? A contract, you can put anything in a contract. And if you look at what currencies are a contract. All kinds of financial instruments are a contract. Whether it's derivatives, futures, options, basket currencies, payment things that go off every month, and annuities, all those kind of things, they're all contracts. So with a smart contracting platform, you can basically do anything in commerce, because financial transactions are a subset of legal transactions. If you do a financial transaction, you're saying, I'll buy that apple from you for $10. That's an agreement, so it's a contract. But some contracts are not financial instruments. I mean, they don't have a financial component. Like, let's agree to see a movie. Doesn't involve exchange of money. So financial contracts are financial transactions are a subset of legal transactions. So if you have a system that can do smart contracts, legal contracts, then it can not just do legal transactions, but every kind of financial transaction. So it's a very powerful general transaction platform. So that's basically the value that we offer to the Bitcoin community. We've got a big problem in security, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. Security is not a trivial issue. There are many different levels and angles on how a system can fail. And to expect every startup to do that is just unrealistic. It's many years of work to build a very solid, secure platform. So that's what we offer basically. We are not a business-to-consumer company, we're a business-to-business company. So if you want to build an app, you can use our platform. Saves you years of work. It's robust, it's highly secure. You just take a few months, or if it's a simple app, a few weeks, and you can immediately make use of this highly secure platform and avoid all the issues that we've seen so far in the Bitcoin economy. What's this here? Yeah, that's basically it. So it's an open platform. We believe open systems always win in the long run. So our open platform allows you to rapidly build very flexible, powerful applications, saving you a lot of time and money. Those are some of the issues in the Bitcoin economy that our system addresses. And I'm not going to go through all of them. Feel free to talk to me afterwards. But the key thing is, if you think of an analogy, in the old days when we used gold, you deposited your gold at the bank, but every transaction, and then the bank gives you a receipt. So one way of doing it would be, every time you do a transaction, you buy some apples or potatoes, and whoever you give the receipt to, you would have to go first back to the bank and get the gold out and then give it to that person, and they would take it back to the bank, and then they would get a receipt and so on. Extremely time-consuming and inefficient. And which is why humans stopped doing that. People just said, well, here's the receipt from the bank, I recognize the stamp of the bank on that, I trust that bank, I'm not going to bother going to get the gold back. I'm just going to trust this receipt. So we just started exchanging receipts, which is way faster and more efficient. That's essentially what our platform does for the Bitcoin economy. the Bitcoin protocol, the blockchain is very inefficient to do transactions. It costs a lot of money. People say Bitcoin transactions are free, but they're actually very expensive. Roughly $10 per transaction. That is a lot of money for one transaction. Now, the reason we don't feel that is because miners are subsidizing the transactions. The blocks that miners earn pay for the vast majority of the transaction cost. So we only pay a tiny little transaction fee, but that mining revenue is going to gradually go down. So eventually, when miners are not making money from those blocks anymore, they're going to have to charge the full transaction cost of what it costs to run their equipment. So $10 per transaction is just totally infeasible. But also, in addition to that, it's very slow. It takes 10 minutes to an hour, sometimes several hours, to clear transactions. Now, at the grocery stand, sometimes they just trust it, it's not too much of a risk, we'll just kind of accept it. But for big transactions, you can't do that. Our system does instant settlement, or to be exact, about 1/10 of a second. Then there's no reversibility. 1/10 of a second, that's how fast instantaneity feels to us. We cannot perceive anything less than 1/10 of a second. So you do a transaction, it settles instantly with total security. And then every once in a while, let's say every 100 or every 1,000 transactions, you can exchange this back onto the blockchain, just like in the olden days with gold. You could say, hey, I just want to check if the gold is actually there. And you go back to the bank, they give you the gold back, you say, okay, all right, I'm satisfied, give me my receipt back. You can do that with the blockchain, but you don't have to do every single transaction on the blockchain. It's not efficient. It's not designed for that. So what is our vision for the future? Our vision is for a large decentralized network society. We've already had small decentralized network society millions of years ago, but our vision is for us to return to that, where people once again have control over their own lives and their own businesses, and the power to control their own assets and their own information. In the age of Ed Snowden and so on, we all feel like we've lost control of our information. And in the age of Cyprus, we've lost control of our assets. You think you have your assets and the government decides, thank you very much, I'm going to take 30 or 40% of it. So the Bitcoin ecosystem enables us to go beyond that. Once again, to have control over our own information and our own assets. And what we need, what we're looking for from the Bitcoin community, we are growing very fast and we need a lot of people. It's a very ambitious project. We're eventually going to be hundreds and exceeding hundreds of people. So we need very good developers and we need funding for that. So we're looking for strong team members, good engineers, and we're looking for business partners and investors. Thanks very much. Yeah, sure.
So you explained there was just a couple of layers to your software, right? One that was human readable and one that was machine readable, and it could be executed by machines. So I'm just having a hard time understanding the human contracts are taken to a court and they're interpreted by a human, and they're very hard to, they're not a binary very decision that can be, whether the contract is somebody's liable or not, right? It's more of a judgment call. So how do you marry that concept into the actual automatic execution?
Sure, absolutely. So it's not 100% one-to-one correspondence between the human readable and the computer readable. Maybe eventually it's going to be, but right now it's not. But you can put the key aspects of the contract, you can make computer readable. So let's say we agree that I'm going to buy 100 iPhones from you for a certain price. Or actually, let's use a better example. Let's say I'm going to order a lot of bananas from you. From you're in Costa Rica and I'm buying bananas from you. And we do this contract using this system and we pay in Bitcoins and so on. Then using an escrow contract, I'm going to order the bananas from you, so I put the amount, let's say it's $1,000, I put the $1,000 worth of Bitcoin into a contract, and incidentally our system works with any currency, not just Bitcoin. So whatever the amount is, I put into a contract, and the system can verify that that money actually is there. And at that point, I no longer have control over that money. So you as the seller can verify the money is there, but you don't have access to it yet either. Then you send the bananas, and as soon as I receive them, I can say, I got the bananas, and I release the money, and you have the money. But now the bananas arrive, and some of them are rotten or whatever, and I say to you, hey, you know what? 10% of the bananas are bad, or they got lost, or there's some issue. And we could agree to settle that somehow. But suppose you said, no, I don't believe you, I think they're all there, and I want all my money. Then we have to take that contract to a dispute resolution agency. And that's where it becomes not computer, but it goes to human person. And the human person will then look at the situation and they'll want evidence. Maybe there's a delivery stuff where there was an inspection, you took photos of them, whatever. They look at the evidence and they decide which way it's going to go. And that will then, once they've decided, so as soon as there's a dispute, the money cannot be released to me or to you. Then it will have to wait until the arbitrator decides that it's going to go this way or that way.
So essentially, if it goes to arbitration, it's human control, and if things go well, then it's automated.
Exactly. So what it adds is that for the first time, you don't need a human to be an escrow agent. Because escrow is typically quite expensive. Now, then you have to find an escrow agent that you trust. Okay, first you don't trust the other party. You want to go to escrow. But then you have to find an escrow guy that you trust, because they also hold in your assets. But with this technology, you don't need to do that anymore. The technology itself can hold the money in escrow. You don't have to, so it's much cheaper and faster to do it. And it's only when there's a dispute that you have to go to human intervention. But there's some very interesting things I'll just mention. Companies like Modria, M-O-D-R-I-A, Modria.com, they're doing all the disputes for eBay. They've developed a system that's really efficient, very cheap, very fast to handle disputes. So in our contracts, you can write them any way you want, but we would recommend that you use somebody like Modria to do very quick, cheap, fast dispute resolution. And it can be a clause right in the contract. So if there's a dispute, it automatically gets sent to Modria.
I was wondering how you compare to Ripple, because as far as I understand, Ripple is also like this distributed ledger system that clears transactions within seconds, supports basically every currency, including Bitcoin, and is also cryptographically secure. Doesn't have the mining problem because all the internal transaction fee currency, the XRPs, are already pre-mined basically. So, are you building another similar system, and adding this dispute services, for example?
So there are some similarities between what Ripple is doing and what we're doing, and we actually support what they are doing. We think it's a great idea, and there are some important differences as well. In fact, the original idea that Ripple had, the way that they had thought of how the system would operate, we are very much in favor of. How they've actually implemented, we're not that keen on some of the ways that they're doing some aspects of that, and in particular, things like the gateways that they're using. You still have to trust the gateway, and the gateway has the ability to change your balances. So in that sense, it's not different to the existing banking system. You have to trust the bank that they're not going to walk away with your assets or change your balances. So with our system, that's literally not possible. You literally cannot change somebody's balances.
So who's running the system?
Say again?
So who's running the system? Do I have to trust them, or is it also distributed like
you see, that's the key thing. There's nobody running the system. With Ripple, there's the gateway entity that's running the gateway.
Okay.
In our system, it's software. The software itself, which you can verify because it's open source, you can look at the code. The software itself guarantees how things work. You don't need a third party. It's completely decentralized. Cuts out the human third party. There's a number of other differences. I'll mention just one more. You said Ripple is cryptographically secure. Excuse me, English is not my first language. Sometimes I fall over words. Ripple does use cryptography, but they don't use it everywhere, and they don't use it for the key aspects of guaranteeing that you cannot change balances and transactions. You can change balances and transactions. So in that sense, and that is why they need the gateways, they need the human element to be the control part to make sure that things operate properly, but you still have to trust them. Whereas with our system, the cryptography is designed in such a way that you cannot change balances. The system is inherently, the software itself guarantees the integrity of the transactions. You cannot cheat. One other difference is that, like somebody, I think you mentioned earlier, that Ripple is basically it's a system for trading credit lines. So in that sense, it's a debt-based system. It's a credit-based system. Whereas our system is an asset-based system. So both systems use IOUs, but an IOU is just, you deposit an asset somewhere, and then whoever holds the asset gives you an IOU. So the fact that you use an IOU does not mean that it's a debt-based system. For example, in the olden days with gold, you put the gold in the bank, they give you an IOU. That's an asset-based system. The gold is the asset that's sitting in the bank. The receipt is just proof that you have that asset. And then you can trade the receipts. But with Ripple, they also use IOUs, but there's no asset sitting there. It's a debt-based system. Basically, it's how much do I trust this person that they're going to pay me that back? So I think that's a key difference. We've seen how many problems arise from debt-based systems.
Is that how societies were originally, like you told 10,000 years ago, how it worked back then? That it was basically debt-based in these local communities?
But it doesn't scale. Because debt works great if you know everybody, the Dunbar number, and you know very well this guy's going to pay you back.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you scale that across 7 billion people?
There's also the entropy involved. It's fabulous. Also, Ripple's a terrible brand name. They should just come up with a better name. It's really a lot of.
I actually like Ripple. I think.
Do you? It's got a beautiful image, but it doesn't work with finance.
People like searching for it and like doing some like trend analysis of like, oh, how popular is the Ripple search? Oh, you get the interface for everything else that's Ripple.
Yeah.
I'll mention one other difference, and that is that Ripple is not a smart contracting platform. So while it is true that you can trade different currencies and so on, it's not a smart contracting platform, which means you can just trade certain assets, but you don't have the ecosystem or a smart contract which guarantees the integrity of the transaction, which is why you need the gateways to do that for you, which is more like the traditional banking system.
Mm-hmm.
They can close out your account. Just like with PayPal, they can shut down your account, they can freeze your assets. In Ripple, that can happen. We want to move away from that to where you don't have to trust humans or the government that they're going to not do bad stuff. The technology makes it that they cannot do that. You control your assets.
So, can I ask, with a system like I'm not very familiar with Ripple, but it sounds like governments, if they wanted to, could just easily shut it down. Whereas with your system, it would be very difficult for the government to actually shut it down.
So in fact, once people start using your system for illegal actions, there will be no way to intervene. Once the mafia sets up a worldwide transaction system.
You mean like the banking system?
Like a bank. Well, you can say that, but you do have some recourse, through the political process.
You mean like HSBC,
what
right?
you're proposing, what you would like to build, is a system that is beyond recourse, that will give bad actors a completely free hand to that we will not be able to stop
like
your
HSBC
vision in any way.
Like HSBC.
They already have that with Bitcoin and with cryptography. It's accessible to them.
It's very understandable to see things like that, but it's actually not realistic.
But that's what you're proposing.
No. It's not realistic, because here's what happens. Just kind of going back to fundamental philosophy, everything in the universe is connected.
Totally.
And one example of that is traffic analysis. very practical example is traffic analysis.
We
Look
gotta
at what
hang out,
happened
Ed.
with Silk Road.
We gotta hang out.
So in other words, the only way that you can do what you propose, in other words, you do bad stuff and get away with it, is you would have to bury yourself under the South Pole or on a different planet or something. Because if you're part of society, there are so many, you leave so many droppings, to use an animal analogy. It's, if you do bad stuff that pisses people off, you are going to be found out.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what system you use and what cryptography you use.
Yep.
Let me give you a few examples. You can use all the cryptography in the world that's absolutely impenetrable, but there are side channel attacks. People can sit outside your door. They pull up a van outside your door. You're doing everything across Silent Circle or whatever you're using, PGP. They just park a van outside your door.